Perhaps you'd like to retire early before 59 and a half, and you'd like to have access to the money that's in your 401k, but you're concerned about that 10% penalty. Or maybe you lost your job or you quit your job and you haven't yet reached 59 and a half. And again, you're concerned about that penalty. Well, under something that's called the rule of 55, which we'll talk about here in just a second, you may be able to not have to pay that penalty. So let's talk about how it works. If you leave your job in the calendar year that you turn 55 or older, the 10% penalty is waived if the plan allows it. Okay, so it's really important because the IRS might allow it, and we'll look at that on the next screen. But your specific 401k plan also has to allow it. So my suggestion is, if you're thinking about doing this, is to call your HR department. Ask them if this is available in the specific 401k. You also want to take a look at the summary plan description of the actual 401k plan as well. The other thing to note here is that it says the calendar year that you turn 55. So if you leave your job, let's say in January, and yet your birthday isn't until June, perhaps, then that's fine because again, your birthday was within the same calendar year. Now, next thing here is, and this comes from the IRS website. There are several different exceptions, by the way, to the 10% penalty. I am just speaking of the rule of 55 or specifically the separation from service. Also of note here is that I'm only talking about 401ks and other qualified plans. I'm not talking about certain government plans. With certain government plans, you may be able to access that money even prior to 55 without that 10% penalty. The other thing that's important to note here is that I am not talking about IRAs or SEP IRAs or simples or even SARSEPs. Okay, none of those, because you cannot utilize this rule of 55 with an IRA or SEP or simple, any of those. Again, there's several different exceptions to the 10% penalty. Some of them only apply to qualified plans, 401ks. Some of them only apply to IRA, SEPs, and simples. So you have to know which one applies to which. But again, specifically for this, it only applies to 401ks and qualified plans. Another thing that's important to note here is that this does not apply if you left your job prior to 55. So if you left your job at 54 and you're thinking, okay, next year I'm going to go ahead and withdraw this money out of the 401k, when I turn 55 and I won't have to pay this penalty, it doesn't work like that. Okay, again, you have to separate from service in the calendar year that you turn 55. Another thing to note is that this only applies to the 401k from your most recent employer. So if you have another 401k or maybe two or three other 401ks from previous employers out there, this does not apply to those. Okay. Now it's not to say that you may be able to roll the money from an old 401k into that newer 401k. That could be a possibility, but you can only withdraw money from your most recent 401k and not have to worry about that 10% penalty under this rule. Another thing to note is, again, the balance must be in the 401k while taking early withdrawals. So I already kind of mentioned this, but it's important to kind of reiterate this. You cannot have the money in the 401k, then roll it into that IRA, then take the money out from that and think that you don't have to worry about the 10% penalty because you waited till 55 and all of that. Doesn't work that way, okay? Another thing to note is that you can still withdraw money even if you get another job. So let's say you lost your job and you need money. You don't have enough money in other accounts and you want the money or need the money from the 401k, you can do that. That's not a problem. Even while you get the new job, you could still withdraw the money from that 401k that we're talking about here. Now, finally, should you use the rule of 55? Here's what I will tell you. I've worked with many people over the years. I've talked with many, many more over the years, and very seldomly does anybody that I see utilize the rule of 55. It's not to say that it might apply to you, and it's another arrow in the quiver, and it's important to know, how it works in case you need to use it. But typically what I find is that if you're looking to retire early, maybe as early as, let's say, 55, and you can't withdraw money typically until 59 and a half, perhaps your spouse is still working and they provide, enough income for the both of you. Perhaps you have other savings or investments that you can tap into just to kind of bridge the gap there for a few years. So, it doesn't typically come up too often, but sometimes, for some people it does. So hopefully this has been helpful. If it has, make sure that you like the video, make sure you subscribe, and I'll see you soon.